Welcome to another Wisdom podcast. We have Dan Gregory with us. He's a conference speaker, trainer, facilitator, holds debate at the Behavior Report, co-founder at the Impossible Institute. He's into a lot of things. I'm glad to have him on the pod today. This podcast brought to you by podper.com. If you want to start or scale your own podcast, go to podpire.com. Dan, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Thanks, Charles. Well, my business partner, Kieran, and I work in the field of human behavior, which is eternally interesting. And so what we do is we spend a lot of time with organizations, with business owners and entrepreneurs, helping them understand, what drives performance, how they can create greater connection in their team and in their community, and how they can increase their influence, both as leaders and thought leaders, but also with their customers and clients as well.
How did you first get into this, and what is fascinating to you about human behavior?
Well, just about everything is interesting to me about human behavior. It was an indirect route to where I ended up. I did very well at school, and I did well at every subject, which sounds like a good thing, but it makes it difficult to make a decision on what to do in life. Like if you're good at woodwork, well, carpentry's for you. Whereas I was good at a lot of things. So the first degree I started was an economics degree, studying to be an actuary because I was really good at mathematics, and that clearly was not where I ended up. So I shifted from that, and I ended up doing primarily a communications degree, and the base of that was in psychology, sociology, and philosophy. And those were subjects that I'd never really paid much attention to, and they were actually the things that really sparked my interest. Those were the things that really got me interested. So I did the communications degree, and then I worked in advertising, had advertising agencies for about 20 years. In the middle of that, I went and spent 3.5 years doing stand-up comedy all around Europe. And, that's another exercise in human behavior. What makes people laugh, what makes people angry is kind of a good reflection of who they are. And then when I came back to Australia, having lived in the US and Europe for a long period of time, I went back into advertising with my business partner, Kieran. And it was interesting. The conference speaking just started. People said, well, hang on, you've had this business career and you were also a stand-up comedian. Can you come and speak at my conference? And that kind of opened up a whole world that I didn't know existed. And Kieran had been the head of the advertising school in Australia called Award. And we'd always loved training people. So it kind of evolved out of that. And we've been doing that for the past 13, 14 years now. Traveling around the world, speaking to audiences, training people, and doing some coaching, a lot of coaching like this over Zoom these days.
Stand-up comedy. Where did you get the idea? It takes some massive balls to do that as well. And how successful were you?
Do you know, the very first advertising agency we were in, we had a really open culture. Everyone knew what everyone else was earning. We shared our personal and professional goals at the beginning of every year, and we held each other accountable. And one of my goals was to try stand-up comedy before I turned 30. So about 3 months before my 30th birthday, another friend of mine who was a stand-up comedian, who was also working at the agency, enrolled me in a stand-up comedy course called The Virgin Sacrifice, and said, "You're on stage in 6 weeks, start writing." And so that was it. It was having the accountability that we built in the culture, and that really launched the career. And then, as I said, I traveled around the world for about 3.5 years, and that was my job. And you learn a hell of a lot, and you get bulletproof on stage.
How successful were you?
In stand-up comedy, it was a job. It was successful enough that it was, I was doing 3 or 4 gigs a week, which was, particularly living in the UK. and traveling around Europe, that's actually you end up being paid more than most people in most jobs that are doing 8 hours a day. I was doing 20 to 30 minutes a day. So it was a nice, easy life. And I got to travel a lot too. And it was really, for me, it was training at altitude. I was a terrible presenter. That was probably my greatest weakness, was presenting. And in the advertising business, a large part of my job was being strategic and being creative. However, a big part of the job was walking into a boardroom and convincing people to give me millions of dollars, and their careers were on the line. So in many ways, it was a perfect training ground for, the career that I built professionally as well. So I actually think, whether or not you want to do stand-up comedy professionally the way that I did, it's actually the perfect testing ground to find out if you can hold an audience or not.
Quite interesting. And yeah, tell me about how you make money nowadays.
Well, I make money, I guess, in three ways now. I make money as a conference speaker, so I go and I speak at conferences. I also do skills training and leadership, corporate training, and leadership development. And the third thing is public coaching. So we do a lot of work with people, uh, usually people who are consultants or professional services or entrepreneurs, helping them build their brands, helping them be more influential in their marketplace, and also how to, develop their presentation skills and be persuasive as a presenter.
What are you observing in your clients, the challenges they face, and how do you resolve the?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of at the moment, there's a lot of not fear, but certainly nervousness around economic conditions, and people aren't sure what's going to happen. And I think there's still a little bit of a hangover from that COVID period, where people are sort of they're reticent to invest. And as we've seen, interest rates shift, and that sort of made the cost of living challenging for people. That's filtered into their professional lives as well. It's changing their behavior. So I think people are more wary than they've been in the past, or more cautious than they've been in the past, even though the underlying economic conditions actually seem reasonably favorable. I think that there's a little bit of a nervousness, and I think the thing that we're being asked to help businesses and organizations with the most at the moment is, how do we create connection in the team? How do we create a culture? So we had, a couple of years of COVID where, people weren't traveling as much, people weren't having as much face-to-face contact. And certainly coming out of COVID, around the end of 2021, early 2022, you had team members who'd never even met each other. And so I think we're still a little bit in that phase where people are relearning some of those human connection skills. So that's certainly one of the things. I think people are still have a competency around how they engage with their customers, but certainly what we're seeing is, how do we create that culture that people want to show up and be a part of? That's really what businesses are finding challenging.
Your mission, what is it? And do you feel that you're maximizing its amplification nowadays?
Yeah. Yes, so the first one, the mission is, I think this year it's very much the focus is coming from contribution, and the contribution we're looking to is, how do we liberate people from their limits? So that's very much a mission for us behaviorally. I think a lot of us buy into a particular identity of who we are or what we're capable of, and we have a very limited definition of who we are and what we can do, and who we can be. And I think being able to challenge some of those limits using behavioral science is really important. And in terms of amplifying that, it's sort of we've sort of gone through a period of reinvention over the past 6 months. So it's really starting to get out into the marketplace, afresh now. I think I almost died a couple of years ago. I was in hospital, had a very challenging health issue. And I sort of came out of the hospital and I said to my business partner, Kieran, and she and I have been in business together for over 30 years. So we're really close. And I said, look, I got an extra chance. I got an extra life. This is like extra time for me. So let's make sure we're doing it, spending it doing the things that we really want to do. And so this idea of liberating people from limits on, the definitions of themselves, the definitions of what their business could be, the definitions of the impact that they can have is a really interesting place to play. And that's kind of how we're filtering the work that we're doing. And we're lucky enough that we've had enough success in our professional lives that we can choose who we work with, we can choose the work that we do, and we can choose how and where we want to do that. So, I think that's a real marker of success. It's not just about the money. It's, do you get to do the work you want to do the way you want to?
Do you feel that you've accomplished most of what you've wanted to accomplish in this life?
uh, no, not yet. Not yet. I've still got some ambition in me and there's still things I want to do. And so Kieran and I went away to Bali on a writing retreat at the beginning of the year. And we went away to write one book, and we ended up sketching out three books. So there's plenty more that I want to be working on. There's plenty more I want to be doing, and it's funny. I don't think people often talk about, well, what are you going to do when you finish working? What are you going to do when you retire? And it's just not something I can imagine. I think I'm constantly curious. And, I'm lucky enough to have found work that I want to devote my life to. And I think that's the real measure of success is, do you get to spend your time doing the thing you're obsessed by?
Right. I think humans are not made to sit on their asses and not do anything. And just like pure pleasure injection. I believe we're made to impose pain on ourselves and grow and challenge
Mm,
ourselves. Not in disproportionate ways, but yet I don't believe in the concept of retirement. Now, it's important to take care of one's health on the way there so that we don't die and we
yeah.
can keep living a nice life. On a day-to-day basis, how do you take care of yourself so that you make sure that you're productive and active?
Uh, well, it's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. So, I've in the past year, I've lost about 65 kilograms. Now, I don't know what that is in pounds.
Like 130, it's like almost
Yeah,
my
yeah,
full
it's
body
it's
weight.
it's a like it's a full-size human being basically. So I've not quite, but almost half my weight. Um, and I think it's about making conscious choices about what I eat, and the exercise I do. Like I work out with weights 6 days a week. I walk probably 1 or 2 hours a day. Uh, and that 1 or 2 hours a day is sort of it's not mentally wasted time either. I'm listening to a podcast or I'm listening to an audio book. I'm constantly looking to, not just look after the health of my body, but also look after the health of my mind. And I look at my dad is 91 and still active and um interested, yeah, and interested in life. And I think that that's a good way to be. And I think you're absolutely right, Charles. I think you need to invest in your health. You need to assume that you're going to live um, to a reasonable age based on expectations in the modern world now. And you need to take better care of the body you're going to be living that life in. So yeah, it's I exercise daily. I consume audiobooks, I read daily, and I also ride my motorcycle, which is my meditation. So it's one of those experiences where you have to be in the moment, otherwise you'll die. And so for me, it's about focusing on one thing and just taking some time to do that one thing.
Yeah, I can understand that. I'm about to buy a motocross here in the mountains. For now, it's an ATV. I mean, if I look away, I won't die, but certainly meditative to be on a motor, a machine that was finely engineered by someone else and can take you places. That's quite
Mm.
wonderful. Then the travel, the sights, right? It's quite amazing. The smells and all of that. Now the stress part of it, how do you manage it? Usually, is it the motorcycles, it the sports, and yeah, what kind of zone are you adequate in? Is it like me, for example, I love imposing massive stress on myself, or just a little bit of stress here and there?
Mm. That's a great question. Yeah, I do think it is the motorcycling, that and I do notice if I don't get a ride for a couple of weeks, I do tend to be a bit scattered in my thinking. So even when I'm traveling anywhere in the world, I'll often hire a motorcycle and go for a ride. The other thing is the daily walks, make a huge difference. It's like if you remember when we used to have to, run defrag applications on our computers to sort of clean up the computer. For me, it's a similar process. Um, and again, I think look, I think stress can be really good for you if it's managed well and if it's the right kind of stress. And I think and stress may not be the right word. I think pressure might be a more accurate description of what I look for. I look for what are the things that are going to test me? What are the things that are going to make me grow? And I think stand-up comedy for that was for me. Like, I mean, a lot of people find that really stressful. And a lot, public speaking is supposed to be the number one fear for people. And it's what I do for a living. So I think anything that stretches you but doesn't break you is really important.
You walk by Anthony Bourdain's mural like almost on a daily basis. Me, I listen to Mac Miller's music on a daily basis. Is that deeply affected me because I used to follow his stuff around Anthony. I did follow his chronicles around too. What do you have to say about founder mental health?
Um, it's one of those conversations that seems really new. Like to me, I'm in my mid 50s now, and I've been in business for a long time. And certainly when I started my business, or the businesses I was a part of starting, no one ever talked about mental health. It was kind of, you work till you drop. It was, and it was, it was a culture that certainly I embraced and cultivated and pushed myself too far in it. And, I paid the consequences health-wise for that. But I think it's one of those things that it's getting the balance right. What we were just talking about. How do you get the balance right between something that stresses you so that you grow, but doesn't stress you so much that you break? And I think I think it's a fine line. And I think having um, a really tight inner circle around you of people you can trust, people you can have a really straight conversation with, people who you can trust to be honest with you, even if you don't want to hear it. I think that's really important. And I think that's important even in, when you're hiring a team to have around you. Kieran and I have always looked to hire people, not to hire people who just agreed with us. We wanted to have people who annoyed us just a little bit. Like they weren't so annoying that it was unbearable, but they were annoying enough that they would push our buttons when they needed pushing. And I think that was really important. So I think that's part of what it is having the right people around you, having a daily way of discharging whatever um, you know psychic buildup you've had over the course of the day, and also having those activities that take you out of your head and into your body are really important.
The other day, you talked about emotions and you reflected on something that I often reflect about, which is that emotions are not facts. They're, well, they exist, that's for sure, but they need to be treated as data points and not like I am this emotion. I
Mm.
guess it's something that most humans get wrong, especially in the workplaces. A bunch of people repress these emotions as well, which is not the right thing to do. What do you have to say about that, CBT, and stoicism?
Well, I think that Stoicism and which is kind of the root philosophy that influenced CBT, are really useful. I think being able to, I think if you're able to treat, feelings as feedback rather than facts, that's a useful metaphor. Uh, in other words, you're absolutely right. You're going to have these feelings, and they're going to feel real, and they're going to, um, generate physiological reactions in your body. However, one of the things that's, about cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy is they give you some tools to interrogate what you've been doing and or what you've been feeling, and to reinterpret them, and actually say, well, actually, is this representative of reality? And I think that that's a useful set of tools to cultivate. And you've kind of got Western philosophy, which had Stoicism. You've got Eastern philosophy, which has Buddhism, and there's in both schools of philosophy, there's these these theories about detaching from the emotion of what's happening, and being able to look at it as a third person observer. And I think that's a useful metaphor. I mean, again, it's like anything in life. It's a discipline that's developed, not something you just learn once and then you're proficient in. And I think those are the interesting things in life, the things that you actually have to invest time in. And I grew up in a very musical family. My mum was a child prodigy. So in my family, everyone learned a musical instrument before we started school, and no one's it's the thing I like about musical instruments is you can't cheat. You can't cheat to be good at piano, to be really good. You can't cheat to be really good at guitar. You've got to put the time in. You've got to put the hours in. And I think that those kind of practices that require discipline to become proficient at are really, really useful metaphors for life. Because I think that, the practice of mental health, the practice of emotional regulation, those are disciplines, not necessarily skills. Like a skill is, well, I've learned it, I can do it. But a discipline is, no, actually, I've learned it, I can do it. But to be really good at it, I've got to do it repeatedly, and I've got to do it consistently.
Right. And what's the role of ikigai into that? And how can people implement ikigai from one day to the next?
Well, I think, there's a very commercial conception of ikigai. And ikigai is a Japanese philosophy that's about finding, work that one of the interesting things I find are the distinctions between, say, Western schools of philosophy and Eastern schools of philosophy is Western schools of philosophy are they're either very individualistic, very capitalist, or they're very collectivist, like socialism, right? One of the things that I think Eastern philosophy does is it straddles the balance between both. And one of the things that I think is useful in ikigai, however it's conceived, is it looks for, what's the intersection of the Venn diagram between you and what the world needs. And I think that, this idea that, well, I'm actually really good at this, I'm really passionate about this, but also actually this makes a real contribution to the world, and the world is willing to pay for it and reward it. And so there's a mutual benefit in it. And I think that's, whether you talk about ikigai, whether you talk about purpose, whether you talk about your why, I think it's important to frame that in, yeah, it is about what's important to you, but it's also about what's important to the people that you serve or the contribution that you make. And I think if you can find that sweet spot between the two, that tension, I think that's actually where the joy is.
I do believe that, yeah, being a conference speaker might be one of the most ikigai thing there is, because yeah, you serve a bunch of people, you improve yourself. Stepping up on a stage is never really a comfortable thing to do, but do you feel that sometimes you're stagnating or you're not evolving as fast as you can?
Um, Look, I think we all feel that from time to time. I think for me, when I went from stand-up comedy was great and I loved it. But say conference speaking, I still get to use the tool of comedy. But what I'm talking about, I actually care about. It's like you go to a stand-up comedy club and it's, there's, oh, last week I was so drunk. Oh, last week I tried to pick up this person, bloody, bloody, blah, right? It's all that stuff. that stuff doesn't really interest me. I'm interested in, human behavior, what lifts us, what moves us, what inspires us, but also how do we have an impact in the world? And I think one of the things that I was at a hotel once and I had this young man come running up to me and he was dragging his wife behind him. And he stopped me in the foyer of this hotel and he said, Dan, you won't remember me, but I saw you and your business partner Kieran speak at a conference, 6 months ago. It absolutely changed everything I did. I changed my business. The business has improved. That saved our marriage. Our kids now go to a better school. And I think, that's part of I think the thing that stops you stagnating is you're always looking for something new, but you're also looking for, well, what's the contribution I get to make? Can I, and once you come from contribution, once your focus is on, well, how does this deliver for the people that I serve or the people that I'm speaking to or the people I'm speaking or training? I think the more you can get out of your own sort of ego and focus on improvement because of the impact it will have, I think that's what stops you stagnating. And I probably read, I'm constantly reading, new papers that are being published in psychological journals. I listen to an audiobook every week. I probably read a book every week. So that's probably 100 books a week on top of the research papers I'm reading and podcasts that I'm listening to. So I'm constantly consuming information. And I think what my role is sometimes I contribute to the canon of research into the behavioral sciences with some of the work that we do. But most of what I do is I kind of synthesize that information and then make it useful and make it entertaining. Because if I'm at a conference, those people might have been sitting in that room listening to lectures for 8 hours a day for 2 days. So part of what I do is I have to put energy into the room and bring them back to life, but I also need to give them something that's useful that they can take away and they can implement, and it makes a difference to either their business or their lives more generally. So I think that stops you. What stops you stagnating is a sense of responsibility about the work that you do. And if you don't have a sense of responsibility about the work that you do, I think you're probably doing the wrong work.
Love it, Dan. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, they can follow us at the Behavior Report, TheBehaviorRpt, or they can get in touch with us at tbr.news.